And here we have the majestic panda. Isn't it stunning, despite the fact that it won't shag anymore? Hello, Shades here. I'm going to be having a bit of a rant in this video because I am getting sick to death of hearing this whenever anybody sees an animal that's in captivity.
Oh, that poor animal! It's so cruel to be keeping it like that! Oh, locked behind bars! It must be so miserable there! That animal should be set free back where it belongs, into the wild! You know, it'd be so much happier there! Or something along those lines.
Now, I'm sure your good self has heard this kind of blanket statement uttered many times before. Perhaps even uttering it a few times yourself without really giving it too much thought. It's become that typical thing that's said when we see an animal in, for example, a zoo or a safari park. In today's modern animal welfare conscious society, it's just kind of taken as a given that keeping an animal outside of its natural habitat is cruel and unfair, and that the humane option for said beastie is for it to instead be back where it belongs, in the wild.
I mean, think of that poor creature behind bars like a prisoner while we sit here wearing our hats indoors. I mean, in the wild it would be so much happier. But would it?
When comparing between being free in the wild or locked up in a good zoo, does anyone even consider that, thinking this through logically, what would actually make this animal the happiest? Because I find that when I do, I come to some very different conclusions. What does an animal need to be happy? Well, that surely depends on the animal. I mean, something like a worm is such a simple thing that talking about it in terms of happiness and misery is frankly ridiculous. It has a few very basic instincts to eat and reproduce.
Ew, now I'm picturing worm sex.
Yet, if you took away all of its food, it would search and search until it starved to death, without feeling anything close to emotion. Imagine you get your laptop to search for a file that doesn't exist, then unplug it and wait for the battery to run out. Would you be saying poor computer when the screen eventually shuts off? Well, that's pretty much a worm, and I'm being generous. So for this example, I'm going to stay clear of the lower creatures, as talking about them in relation to this video does not work. They are far too removed. A worm behind bars and a worm in the wild are exactly the same thing. The question of what makes an animal happy only really starts to make sense when we talk about the higher animals, those that have the capabilities of having anything close to those kind of emotions. But even this doesn't really make sense of the question, as bar us humans, scientifically speaking, no creature feels happiness in the same way that we do. It took mankind millions of years to develop a brain capable of feeling complex emotions, and it was a result of these complex emotions that we developed language, culture, and artistic expression. Even our closest relatives in the animal kingdom, the chimpanzee, isn't even close to feeling the range of powerful emotions that we do. And it is here that I think the problem lies. Our tendency to humanise animals and make them into something that we can understand and relate to.
I was once with this girl watching a programme on TV about a zoo of some kind, and it was showing the lion enclosure, and there was this lion that was just sort of sat there staring into space, as lions tend to do during the day if they're not asleep, and she genuinely thought, while it was sat there, that it was miserable, reminiscing about old times when it used to frolic in the wild and, you know, live a life of freedom. And this is ridiculous humanisation of animals, but some people genuinely think this.
Anyway, for an example, why don't we stick with the majestic lion? It's a higher animal and therefore the most demanding in terms of its emotional needs, so it's a fine example for this question. And in order to illustrate my point, I'm going to use the film Born Free.
Born free as the wind blows, as free as the grass grows, born free to follow your heart.
I've chosen this as my example as, firstly, it's a true story. Secondly, it's a film that most people have seen, or at least know the basic story to. And thirdly, it is about a lion that was in captivity and is then released into the wild, and so is a perfect case study for this video, and for the question, which situation would make the animal the happiest? For anyone who hasn't seen the film,
Live free and beauty surrounds you. The world still astounds you each time you look at a star.
it's about a lady called Joy Adamson who lives in Africa and who adopts a baby lioness called Elsa after its mother is killed. She raises the cub as a pet, and the two of them become very close in the same way that a dog and its owner become close. However, after Elsa becomes too big and too much of a risk to keep anymore, she decides to train it to be fit for the wild, rather than let it go to a zoo. Incredibly, she is able to do this, and I'm not arguing that is amazing, and Elsa goes off to live in the wild. So was this the right decision in terms of Elsa's happiness? The aim is for Elsa to be happy, and we have two options: the zoo, which was one of the best zoos in the country, or the wild plains of Africa. So, before we see what happens with her, let's first think about what makes a lion happy. I never thought I'd say that. It's a very difficult question as well, as I don't really know anyone who speaks lion. But if I did, I think the conversation would go a little bit something like this. Food, 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 food. Sex, 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 sex. Okay, I'll be fair. Because it's a higher animal, much like a dog, I'll add on space to run about, a safe environment to raise its cubs, a comfortable climate, companionship with others of its species, and not to feel any pain. If anyone has any others, please let me know in the comments. But if you say something like the longing for freedom,
Born free.
just know. I'm using the information we have from evidence-based research and Darwinian evolution, not the Lion King. So, back to Elsa. Well, first, she has to be trained for the wild, which for a while creates an extremely confused and anxious lioness. She's never had to catch her own food before, but now the buffet is firmly closed. Elsa, and this goes for all animals, wants to eat as much as she can when she can, and the easier that food's acquired, the better. Now, when she's finally released into the wild, she's almost immediately thrown into a fight for dominance of a wild pack. She wins, but this is a life-threatening situation. A lot of animals have interspecies fighting for dominance in the wild, and it often results in a death, or if not a death, then a lot of pain. The film ends on a touching note with her frolicking in the sun with her new pack, where food will now be very hard to come by, where she will have to often fight to maintain her position in the group, and where, when she finally has some cubs, they will be in danger from other predators and hunger. By the way, did you know that Born Free...
Born free.
Shut up! Had a sequel. It was called Living Free, in which the incredible story of the lioness continues, for about 10 minutes before she dies of an illness, leaving 3 defenceless cubs behind. The film revolves around the Adamsons trying to save these 3 cubs, which certainly would have died if it wasn't for their intervention. So that's the story of Elsa in the wild, and is a good example of the kind of challenges that animals have to go through in the wild. Now, what would have happened if Elsa had gone to the zoo? And by the way, in this video, when I talk about the zoo, I mean a good zoo that meets the top regulations. I also agree that horrible zoos where either their cages are too small, or the animals are treated maliciously, or they're not provided with enough food, they are disgusting places and no animal should have to go through that. Remember, I did say that even though I don't humanise these animals, an animal in pain is not a happy animal. But Elsa would have gone to a good zoo, so she would have had plenty of food, companionship with others of her species, with regular sex, plenty of room to roam about, a safe place to raise her cubs, access to vets and medicine, and she would have been under close observation, so if anything was going wrong, if she was showing signs of suffering any illnesses, it wouldn't be for long.
Kinda sounds like the perfect life.
Right, I suppose I should get to the point that I'm making. And it's that due to films like Born Free, don't even think about it, and The Lion King, people think of the wild as this beautiful, majestic place, which it is for us humans to observe, not for the animals living in it, however. Darwinian evolution tells us that in the wild, it's all about survival of the fittest, and that animals are locked in a constant fight for survival, where they are hungry, scared, and die before their time. It is, as it says on the tin, the wild. A good zoo, where all the creature's needs are met, is in relation a paradise. One last thing, let's face it, humanity is fighting a losing battle when trying to protect the environment, and as the population continues to grow, it's only going to get worse. Many animals will adapt because that's what animals do, but many will also go extinct. This isn't anything new, it's happened throughout our planet's history. There's only so much fuss over it because we are now clever enough to have recorded many species, and we now notice when they go extinct. But extinct, many of them will go. Some because of us, some not. But if we love the friggin' polar bear so much, maybe, instead of filming it, starving, sat on a melting iceberg, with a dying cub by its side, we could try sticking it in a lovely zoo. We're happy, the polar bear's happy, and everyone is a winner. As always, thank you so much for watching. And if anyone is watching and they would like to have a bit of a debate about this or just share their opinion on this topic, then I would love to do something like that in the comments section. Anyway, see you later, alligator, in a wild crocodile.